Hello guys! In this video, we're going to create this simple animation inside Adobe After Effects and Adobe Illustrator. So as you can see, first we're going to create this illustration inside Adobe Illustrator and then organize it on each layer. So now, first I'm starting out with pen tool in order to create our main shape of our card. Then I'm using a rectangle tool to create perfect square. And then I'll copy this first part and move it at the end. And then using a shape builder tool, I will merge them together and transform it so it fits perfectly for me. Then I'm creating a top part of our card using a rectangle tool also. And then I'm centering it in middle. Also, I will curve out edges using a direct selection tool. Now, as you can see, I have already prepared my color palette that I'll be using for this specific illustration, which also very much speeds up my workflow. Now, when we are done with our card, we can move on to a golden nuggets, which you have also seen in the intro. So also, I'm using a pen tool to create golden nuggets. So also, in order to speed up your process, you can create one gold nugget and then using your direct selection tool or only selection tool, you can resize them how much you want, rotate them, and do all of those fun activities with them. Also, I have created one line which you can expand to create a shape, and then using a direct selection tool, you can shape out the edges of this line, as I'm doing right here. Also, if you want to move and copy a certain shape in one go, just hold Alt on your keyboard and left click on your mouse. Now, I'm also using a pen tool to create a lighter and darker shade of this ore. I'm connecting anchor points to create a shape and then changing a fill color and decreasing opacity. You can create a shade of your object. And here I'll expand my ore in order to separate a stroke color from a fill color, which can be handy if you want to move a shade below your stroke. And then I will repeat the process, but now I'm using a curved pen tool to create a curved shape, which we'll also use for a shade of our golden ore. But here I'll leave a black fill color. So in order to create a darker shade, and also because, as I mentioned earlier, I separated stroke from fill color so that I can move a shade below stroke color. Now that I have separated and created this ore, I'll just copy this exact same ore and paste it and, for example, rotate it a bit and increase a scale size. Now, when we are finished with everything here, we can move on to wheels. So I'll use ellipse tool to create perfect circle. You can do it by holding Shift on your keyboard, and then I will position them so they are equally away from the center of our card. And then I'll create a center smaller circles, and I will change their fill color. And now we're getting closer to the finish of our illustration. I'm moving my ores a little bit closer to them and reorganizing them. But here I also realized that we can add more shade to our illustration. So I will add shade to wheels and to our cart, repeating the same technique that we use for our ores. Also, I'm going to create an obstacle, which in this case will be rock. Again, I'll be using pen tool, creating simple lines, but make sure that you do not connect the first and the last anchor point, because then you will create a shape which in this case is not very practical because this rock is moving, and if you see a bottom line, it won't create that effect that we want to create in this animation. I will add shades, and I will add another line that we can expand the shape and curve out edges. Now for me starts a very boring part, which is separating each individual shape or object that we want to animate on a separate layer. So how I'm doing it is by grouping, for example, one ore, and then creating a new layer and renaming it, and then dragging that group to that just created layer. I will speed up this process, but make sure that you catch up with this process because later on it will be easier for you to follow my animation process. And now, when you open Adobe After Effects, in order to import your illustration, just drag it from your folder into Adobe After Effects Media panel, and then drag that composition onto a timeline. And then, by double-clicking on it, you will open all of these layers that we have already created inside Adobe Illustrator. Now, I'll position my rock so it is aligned with our wheels. And as you could have seen in the intro, we have created an illustration where our mining cart gets into collision with rock, where our rocks fall out from our cart and then go back inside, and that is it. So first I'm going to open rock layer inside Adobe After Effects, and here below transform you can find position effect, which I'll use for this layer. So first set first keyframe where your starting position is, and then a second keyframe which represents the end position of our rock. Nothing fancy here, just using position to maneuver my rock from the right side to the left side. Now, as you can see, the rock is visible, so I'm going to locate this layer at the bottom so it is below all of the other illustrations. Next, I'm going to animate both of these wheel shadows using opacity. This is also very simple. I'm just using keyframes for opacity and increasing to 100 and the next keyframe to 0 and then next to 100, so it is gradually fading away and fading in. I'll use this for both of these shadows, but the right shadow will have a little bit layover, so they're not fading away and fading in the same moment. And also I'm going to animate a shadow from the cart using the same technique that we use for both of these wheel shadows, using only opacity. Make sure that you link all of these shadows to their parent layer, which will help us when we will move our cart when the cart gets into collision with rock. And now comes the main part. Here we're going to animate cart. First I'm using a position to move my cart from the ground to the top when the collision is set. So when you're done with the position effect, you can set rotation effect and add a slight curve when our cart hits rock. As you can see, I'll do it right over here, and then when the other wheel hits rock, it will move a cart to the opposite side, And now comes the rock animation part. I'm going to animate each rock as its own unit. So I'll start with rock 1. The math behind this animation is that when our cart first hits the rock, the gold nuggets will pop out, slightly rotating towards the opposite of collision. And when the second wheel hits, the golden nuggets will also go the opposite way of the collision and then going back inside a cart. So I'm using also position, scale, and rotation. You can set a basic keyframes at the beginning so you remember where the starting position is, which you can later on copy and paste at the end of the animation so they're back to the beginning position. What you can also do is probably copy all of these keyframes and paste them on each layer, adding a slight transformations because of the difference in the scale size of these golden nuggets, which massively speeds up your workflow. So I'm adding a middle keyframes with slight rotation, as I said earlier, when the collision begins. Here I'm also going to add another set of keyframes, and this should look like this. Using the same technique that we use here, you can use it for other golden nuggets and then create our final animation. Now that we have created this main part of animation, I'm going to add small details. For example, I'm going to add a shining effect on these gold nuggets. So now I'm going to go back to Adobe Illustrator, and here I'll create a shining effect by creating one simple curved star. So I'll go back to my sequence, and here I will select Star tool, click on my screen, and here I will decrease points to 4, and I will leave everything as it is. And here, for example, I will curve these edges a little bit. Okay, this is fine, and I will remove stroke color and change fill color to the same color of our gold bars. For example, I will place it right over here. Maybe select a bit brighter color. And this is just fine. And rename it Star Shine Effect. And then go back to our previous layer. Select our star and move it at just created layer. Now you don't need to create another or multiple exact same layers because you can copy them in Adobe After Effects. So now we can save this file and go back to Adobe After Effects. And here I'll zoom in on our screen, maybe a little bit more. Okay, so now I will animate this effect. For example, at the beginning, we'll be using opacity, rotation, and scale. Decrease opacity to 0, rotation 0, scale maybe also 0, maybe 25. And then move a couple of frames forward. Add keyframes, increase to 100, maybe to 784. Add rotation. So now you should have created this simple animation. Maybe I will move these keyframes 2 frames forward. Okay, now when you're pleased with how it turned out, we can copy these keyframes, paste them how much we want this effect to last. Hit Ctrl V. For example, here we will add keyframes, decrease to 0, add rotation, and decrease scale. And now your effect should look like this. Now you can copy these settings when our cart goes back to normal. For example, here we can paste them, and now we have created this star animation. Now we can copy this layer, paste it, open transform, select them, move them, for example here, but make sure that it does not appear when we hit rock. Okay. Now we can move it, for example, maybe here at the middle. And now we have added this gold shining effect. Also, if you want to, you can move it closer to the gold, but I will leave it here. Now when we are finished with this animation, we can render it. So for example, close your layers and then make sure that your composition is selected, go to composition and hit pre-render. Now here, if you want to adjust output, just click on this link and it will open a folder where you want to save it. Custom AVI. If you want to adjust format or other settings, I'll leave it to AVI. But remember that AVI format requires a lot of drive space, so keep in mind that it could take a lot of your drive space. Hit OK, best settings. Here you can adjust the length of your video, resolution, quality, disk cache, and all the other fun parts. Now click OK, and to finish off, hit render. And it will render your video in a couple minutes or seconds. See you in the next video. Bye.